Welcome everyone to a presentation on CMMC by ISSE Services. We'll get started in a second. Wait about 2 to 3 minutes and then we'll get started. All right, let's get started. Like I said before, welcome everyone to a presentation on CMMC by ISSE Services. I'm your presenter, Jeff Snyder. My career started as an IT in the Coast Guard. During my 10 years active duty, I honed the skill of balancing cybersecurity and being able to do the mission. After the Coast Guard, I joined ISSE Services in 2022 and have been helping companies implement CMMC security requirements. For certifications, I am a CMMC certified professional, and for formal education, I have a master's in cybersecurity and information assurance. A little about ISSE Services. We are a woman-owned small business and have been supporting the DoD for over 20 years. We have a strong presence in northern Utah. We are a registered practitioner organization, which means we can offer CMMC consulting services to help organizations get ready for an assessment. We also offer managed security services, and earlier this year we went through the third-party assessment process for CMMC Level 2 and received a perfect score of 110 out of 110. Here's an overview of the topics I will be presenting. What is CMMC 2.0? I want to make sure all of us are on the same page about what it is and what its requirements are. Then I will talk about the process of becoming CMMC compliant. And if you have questions, you can type them in chat and we will address them at the end. This presentation will run about 20 minutes. And our why in giving this webinar is to help business leaders make informed decisions on developing a path to becoming CMMC compliant. There is a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt in the community, and we want to speak in plain terms and show you that it can be done. All right, getting started. What is CMMC 2.0? CMMC version 2.0 was released in November 2021. CMMC applies to DoD prime contractors and their subcontractors that process, store, or transmit FCI or CUI, and you'll hear that a lot, that process, store, or transmit. CMMC's purpose is to implement cybersecurity controls within the defense industrial base. The levels of CMMC are decided by the classification of the information your organization deals with. And November 10th is when CMMC Phase 1 will begin, meaning all new contracts could include CMMC language. Now, on to the meat of the presentation. How does my organization get started down the path of CMMC? Starting off with a timeline for the various steps of a level 2 journey. The assumption is that you are starting from scratch. It is conservative to allow for revising documentation and the long lead time for scheduling an assessment with a C3PAO, which stands for Certified Third Party Assessor Organization. This is just an estimate. It means that it is possible to do it faster, and it is possible that you can take longer. You'll notice the bulk of the time is in implementing and preparing for an assessment. And I can't stress this enough. The level of effort to document security requirements and gather all of the evidence or artifacts should not be underestimated. All right, so step one. Step one is to identify your CMMC level. Obviously, you need to know what target you are trying to hit. 48 CFR, which stands for Code of Federal Regulation, states that new contracts will contain the level and the assessment type that is needed prior to contract award. Level 1 is federal contract information, which is information that is not approved for public release. There are 17 security requirements, and you can self-attest. Level 2 is controlled unclassified information. There are 110 security requirements, and it is possible to self-attest, but most likely will require a C3PAO to assess your company. And level 3 is the most sensitive type of CUI and adds more security requirements, and the assessment is done by the federal government, so DIBCAC. The security requirements are outlined in NIST's special publication 800-171 and for level 3 800-172. All right, there's a lot of information to explain on this slide. Step 2, once you know the value of the information the government is sending you, the next step is to identify the assets that process, store, or transmit that data. The assets will typically be captured in a document such as an asset inventory spreadsheet. There are 5 asset types. First, CUI assets. These include printers, laptops, desktops, phones, or mobile devices, backup solutions, USB drives, CDs, and even physical documents. And as you can see, this category covers both digital and physical mediums. CUI assets are always in type or always in scope for an assessment. Next are security protection assets. Examples are key badge systems, physical security devices and keys, SIM solutions, Windows Defender or other antivirus tools, firewalls, routers, and intrusion prevention or detection systems. These assets that provide security functions or capabilities to the organizations, they are always within the CMMC assessment scope, even if they don't directly process, store, or transmit CUI. And just to reiterate, that means they will be evaluated against all 110 security requirements. The third asset type is contractor risk managed assets, or CRMA. These are assets that could technically process, store, or transmit CUI, but are not intended to due to security policies, procedures, or practices. And examples of this include docking stations, monitors, televisions, microphones, visitor management systems, even computers in departments like HR or the executive assistant's computer that never touch CUI. So CRMAs are not, excuse me. CRMAs are not assessed against all 110 security requirements, but the documentation showing how they are protected will be carefully reviewed, and they do not need to be physically or logically separated from CUI assets. Fourth, specialized assets. Examples include IoT devices, government property provided to you, CNC machines, and other manufacturing equipment. These assets may or may not process, store, or transmit CUI. Again, they may or may not process, store, or transmit CUI. They are not assessed against all 110 security requirements, but they must still be documented in the system security plan and the hardware inventory. Finally, we have out of scope assets. These are devices that never process, store, or transmit CUI at any time and never will. They are either physically or logically separated from CUI assets. And according to the Level 2 scoping guide, there are no documentation requirements, but it does say to prepare to justify the inability of an out of scope asset to process, store, or transmit CUI. All right, so after identifying all of your assets, step 3 is to choose a technical design. The all-in approach is bringing everything in your organization into the CMMC assessment scope. An enclave is typically recommended if 20% or less of your organization needs to access CUI or FCI data. And an enclave includes building out a specific part of your environment to comply with CMMC requirements. Here is an example of a network diagram of the all-in approach. You can see all devices are within the same boundary. And here's the bring up a laser pointer. So you can see it's all in the same boundary. And here is an example of an enclave. You can see the organization sections off a part of their infrastructure for the FCI or CUI environment. Step 4, once you have picked a technical design, the next step is to start configuring your environment to satisfy the CMMC security requirements. Keep in mind, you will need to prove all of your devices satisfy all applicable NIST 800-171 security requirements. And when I say all your devices, I mean all of your devices that are in scope of the assessment. Here's an example of a CMMC security requirement. This one is requirement 3.14.6, which says we need to monitor our systems, including both inbound and outbound communications traffic, to detect attacks and indicators of potential attacks. To meet this requirement, there are 3 assessment objectives that must all be satisfied. So objective A is about monitoring the overall system. This includes things like cloud environments, firewalls, antivirus, access logs, and computer logs. Objective B and C focus specifically on inbound and outbound communications traffic. That means monitoring logs from firewalls, intrusion detection and prevention systems, host-based firewalls, cloud networking logs, etc. So for each of these objectives, it is not enough to say we have logs turned on. We need evidence that logging is enabled, properly configured, and actually monitored. That evidence is often called artifacts and is what assessors will look for to verify compliance. And remember, this is just one security requirement. In total, there are 110 requirements that break down into 320 separate assessment objectives. And each one needs to be addressed and evidenced just like this example. All right, so step 5 is to prepare for the assessment, the CMMC assessment, by drafting documentation, policies, gathering evidence, like I said, also known as artifacts, and then you'll be drafting even more documentation and then even more documentation. We are going to go through each of the steps on the slide to show how to start preparing for the assessment, and these are not necessarily in order. Here is an example of an asset inventory spreadsheet, and be sure to include out of scope assets. So you will need to draft an SSP. For level 2 and level 3, you have to have a system security plan. This template that's on the slide is available at the URL on the bottom. Be sure to write the SSP at the security objective level and not at the higher security requirement level. If you write it at the higher security requirement level, you won't demonstrate compliance for the 320 security objectives. And you'll also need to include a network diagram in your SSP. Here is an example of a data flow diagram. It is not required, but is highly recommended. And the diagram helps assessors understand where data is processed, stored, and transmitted throughout your organization. So you'll want to define the various responsibilities in the organization. For example, there is a security requirement to review the public website and make sure there isn't CUI. So whose responsibility is that? Who does incident response? Who does sysadmin and network admin? Who reviews the SSP? All the roles and responsibilities need to be defined in your SSP. You will want to locate the FIPS certificates for the parts of your environment that are responsible for encryption, both for data in transit and data at rest. It's important to understand that the encryption algorithm must be validated, not just approved. And you can verify this by checking the NIST cryptographic module validation program, which maintains the official list for validated modules. Step 6, working with an MSP or an RPO can be done at the same time as step 5. This step is optional because your in-house IT or security department may already be capable of documenting and implementing all 320 security objectives. An RPO or registered practitioner organization provides CMMC consulting. They can guide you on how to answer the controls, configure your environment, and prepare for an assessment. An MSP or managed services provider is essentially the outsourcing of your IT department. They can also help you get across the finish line. Common strategy that saves both time and money is to let your in-house administrators take the first pass at the CMMC security objectives and then bring in an RPO to do a gap analysis, check your work, and fill in anything that may be missing. So the question becomes, how do you find an RPO? You can go to the Cyber AB Marketplace and filter for RPOs. And here's a screenshot of our company listing on the website. If you have an MSP supporting your organization, you will need to work with them to create and document a shared responsibility matrix. This matrix outlines which security objectives are handled by your organization and which are handled by the MSP. Here, for example, is Microsoft Azure's shared responsibility matrix. It's important to understand that an MSP does not automatically receive a CMMC certification just because your organization passes its assessment. They are responsible for providing documentation and evidence for the security objectives that they manage on your behalf. Here's a great slide to screenshot for questions to ask your MSP. Do they have a shared responsibility matrix to NIST 800-171A? Do they have or are they pursuing their own CMMC Level 2 certification? Are they able to support you through a CMMC Level 2 assessment? Do they have any DoD or defense industrial base customers? Have they assessed their own tools or providers for compliance? And do they have only US persons that would be supporting your environment? So step 7, the final step is to complete an assessment. You can find a certified third-party assessor organization on the Cyber AB Marketplace. To pass the assessment, you must score a 110 out of 110. There is also a conditional certification if you score at least 88 out of 110. However, the requirements you miss can only be certain 1-point requirements. Each security requirement is assigned a point value of 5, 3, or 1. And again, you can only fall short on the 1-point requirements. If you receive a conditional certification, you have 180 days to fix whatever is missing and schedule a reassessment. So you'll end up with the perfect score of 110 out of 110. And during an assessment, the C3PAO assessors will be on site to review certain security requirements. Most of them revolve around physical security. And remember, your MSP or RPO can support you throughout the assessment process. So here are some questions to help you determine if you are ready for an assessment. And if the answer to all of these questions are yes, then you are ready for your assessment. So can you defend the scope you have presented? If you are using an MSP, are the roles clearly defined? Has your team been prepared for the assessment? Are they ready for the interviews? And did you ensure that your plan of action and milestone is empty? All right, let's do a quick recap. CMMC is a requirement for all businesses working with the Department of Defense that process, store, or transmit federal contract information or controlled unclassified information. Starting November 10th, new government contracts may include CMMC language. On average, the timeline to become compliant is about 7 to 8 months. So if CMMC is keeping you up at night, please reach out to us. There is a clear path to certification, and it's not nearly as painful as you might be imagining. Again, November 10th, new contracts may include CMMC language. All right, here's another great slide to screenshot. These links are great resources for helping your organization implement CMMC. So always go to the source of truth. All right, that is the end of the presentation. My contact information is at the bottom of the screen. Again, please contact us if CMMC is stressing you out. And are there any questions in chat? I'll stay on and address any. All right, doesn't look like there's any questions in chat. Thank you for your time.